My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be John and Dickens, Video 24, Anthems. Here is my novella, John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery, a novella by John Passfield. Okay, just moving it so the diagram is clear. John finds himself in the writing room of Charles Dickens in 1834. Dickens is surrounded by his pre-Christmas Carol characters. The Christmas Carol characters are giving Dickens a difficult time. They're reluctant to agree to let him put their story into a novella, which will eventually be a Christmas Carol. Writer John Passfield leaves his home, buys a coffee, and drives down to the shores of Lake Erie to perform a Christmas ritual. Strolling along the beach at Port Maitland is something he's done for many years, but this year is different. This year, John suddenly finds himself in the writing room of famed Victorian novelist Charles Dickens, who sets out his new idea for a Christmas tale. Dickens invites John to watch rehearsals for the writing of the story, but as Dickens struggles through contentious negotiations with his amazingly independent characters, John wonders whether A Christmas Carol will ever be written. So that's the premise of the novella. An anthem is a statement of belief, usually in verse form, whether to be sung or to be read. The best anthems are written in the language of imagery rather than of prose. It makes sense to me that just as societies have anthems, national anthems, so too do individual minds have anthems, statements of belief in image form against which to measure current circumstances. Okay, an anthem is a statement of belief in image form against which to measure current circumstances. That's one of the reasons why we sing the national anthem. There are 4 anthems which are operating at an unstated level of the consciousness of the main character of this novella, John. So I will read all of these anthems. Now, they're not labeled in the novella, but I'll give them a topic. The first one has to do with wine. So let's go to page 9. They're very simple, but they're statements of belief against which you measure your current situation. They're grapes, just grapes, said the one. From page 9, we go all the way to page 18. So this statement is measuring all the other imagery between page 9 and page 18. They're not grapes, they're wine, said the other. So 2 people disagreeing about something. Page 28 is the third installment. They are grapes when they are grapes. And that was page 28. So then we go to page 38. You can see we're leaping 10 pages ahead, leaving 10 pages of imagery, which these anthems are interpreting. And they're wine when they are wine. So a third voice says they're grapes when they're grapes. They're wine when they're wine. Then page 51, just a little tag to end this anthem, said the third. Okay, so they're grapes, says the first one. No, they're wine, said the second one. The third one says, well, they're grapes when they're grapes, but they're wine when they're wine. So how does that interpret all the other imagery of this experience in the mind of the main character? Okay, Inside Out, page 12. This has to be read very carefully because it's been written very carefully, but it's a little awkward to read. When he was outside out and inside in, everyone knew him. Okay, now we go to page 22. When he was inside out and outside in, no one knew him. Then to page 31. Again, leaving out about 10 pages of imagery that's being commentated on, moderated by these images. When he was outside out and inside in, no one knew him. And then to 43. Here it is. When he was outside out and inside in, everyone knew him. And then 54, for the punchline. Every anthem has a punchline, I assume. He hoped one day to get to know himself. So trying to figure out oneself, trying to figure out others trying to figure out us. Okay, this one, we'll start on page 60 with this one. And the heading is simply the moon, but no headings appear in the book. These are simply imagery that are interlayered among the images of the current experience of John meeting Dickens in his writing room and seeing all these images of Dickens as a boy and of Dickens rehearsing his characters for this new novella, A Christmas Carol. And these images are monitoring the other images, commenting on the other images. That's how imagery works in a piece of serious literature. He was born on the dark side of the moon. Then to page 70, again, 10 pages of imagery that these images are commenting on. He always thought he'd like to travel. Page 80, go and live somewhere else. Page 90, but he didn't know what was out there. And then page 99, just missed the 10-page limit by one page. So he spent his life on the dark side of the moon. So lives fulfilled, lives misspent, I suppose, eh? Not knowing what's out there, stay where you are. The last one I'll call mirror. We go to page 64. So the question is, how does this comment on the imagery of the surface story of John's experience? Comes to us as glass, said the mirror maker. Then 73. We put a coat of silvering on the back. 84. Whoops, one more page would be 84. People looking at the glass call it a mirror. 93. But a mirror is a glass all the same. And then 101 for the punchline. Unless it's broken, then you'd say it's neither one. Okay, those are 4 anthems. An anthem is a poem or verse that comments on other imagery. That let me just read that line again. That allows us to evaluate the current situation. Okay, a national anthem is always measured against the current situation in a nation. A personal anthem is measuring itself against the current situation in our personal experience. Okay, here's a general note then about literature. I've said in my journal notes and my planning notebooks and even in some of my videos that the task of every writer of serious literature is to develop a form into which to pour the white-hot liquid of one's imagery. In order to present these forms, each writer must develop a set of literary techniques. One of the worst literary techniques ever devised is the technique of the allegory. An allegory is one of the categories under which fictional stories can be placed. A fictional story has characters, has a setting, has a situation, which raises the question of where the story should go or might go from here. If the characters have any power to make changes, then the story raises the question of what changes they should make for their own betterment or for the betterment of others. If the characters have no power to make changes, the story raises the question of how best the characters should respond to this situation. What does an allegory do? Well, an allegory is an item of literature in which each element in the item of literature corresponds to one element in the actual world. The problem with this presentation mode, with this narrowing down of potential meaning, is that once we have the solution to the allegory, we are left with a story which has no more value than a solved Agatha Christie mystery. The writer is not writing imagery because that is the deepest level of communication between humans. The writer is writing in characters, settings, and situations because it's a clever way of creating a puzzle for someone to solve. There is nothing more stale than a solved puzzle, and there's nothing more rich than a highly complex work of fiction. The puzzle applies to one set of answers only and then is dead in terms of its suggestive value. The item of rich and highly complex fiction continues to apply, if we're thoughtful, to many situations and to many people in the entire range of human experience from the beginning of the world to the present and beyond. Now, sadly, the categories blur. Any literary critic who insists that there's one interpretation and one interpretation only of a work of literary art is treating a rich literary classic as an allegory. The interpretation that the critic is giving is valid for that critic because the imagery has gone into the mind of the critic and interlayered with the imagery of that critic's entire life experience. Therefore, that critic's interpretation of a novel, play, or poem is valid for that critic. What that critic is forgetting is that the imagery of that particular literary classic will enter the mind of another reader and interlayer with an entirely different layer of imagery from that reader's life experience. And hence, it's only logical that the classic piece of literature will have an entirely different interpretation, equally valid, equally valuable, but entirely different for that reader. And that is why the technique of allegory is, to me, the worst literary technique ever devised. It stifles the stories that it tells, and it stifles some readers of great literature rather than liberating them due to a common misunderstanding about all complex literature. For this reason, I would say that allegory is an anti-literary device. Why do some kids hate literature? Because they can't figure out how the teacher arrives at the teacher's meaning. Well, the teacher has a valid meaning, but the student would have a different meaning if the teacher would allow that to be part of the discussion. Okay. Once again, this is my novella, John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery, a novella by John Passfield. It's found on Amazon. You can have a look there. It's found at roxmillspress.com, my publisher's website. It's found at my website, johnpassfield.ca, where you'll find a planning notebook for free. Just click on the icon and have a look. A reflective journal for free. Just click on the icon and have a look. And lastly, thank you for watching this video.